Your bio, I was thinking to myself, like, what was that like for you to be working on climate issues before many people really cared about and even believed in climate?
Mm-hmm.
And how has your journey sort of arced and moved as we really come to be living in the midst of now a climate crisis?
Yeah. Yep. Climate emergency.
Totally.
Yeah.
There was something more simple, which is like, how did you get started
Yeah.
in the climate conversation? Like, when was the first time you realized that this was something worth paying attention to?
Yeah. Great question. So like many folks of my generation, Gen X, we didn't really start with it being a climate conversation. It started with clean air, clean water, um, environmental justice. Certainly, we were not capable of calling out like racism or white supremacy or patriarchy or any of the kind of overarching systemic drivers of a lot of these problems. But we did know that there was this major public health and pollution threat from many different sources and just our capitalist system, and that it was impacting communities of concern the most. But that's kind of where my journey started, is in San Diego at an environmental justice organization with frontline communities. Again, these are all new terms that we did not use. And now we can call it out as environmental racism, but it was a community that is buffered by freeways and a port, a very high active polluting
Are we
port.
talking about Barrio Logan or?
Yes, I'm talking about Barrio Logan, and National City. And Chula Vista, which is in San Isidro near the border. And so that's kind of where my training started. Really, I had some previous experiences that were leading up to kind of the job that was most formative to my career. But that's where I entered this space. And again, climate was not what was not in any lexicon or dialogue. It was just all about air quality and public health. And so that was jarring to learn as a white privileged person who did not really understand until I saw it firsthand. And we were very focused on residents and organizing residents. So just, understanding their journey from a secondhand experience, obviously, but just witnessing it and hearing from them and being out in the community and experiencing it, just as a visitor. But at the time, San Diego was very conservative, and we were marginalized. We were not a welcome organization or part of the political establishment. We were definitely much outsiders, knocking on the door, trying to get elected officials to listen to us. It was I think, an important lesson for me about how power, matriculates and how to get it and where power usually resides. So I had a lot of incredible lessons learned, how to navigate a very challenging environment politically and still have your voice heard, like how, and obviously not just the professional advocates, but the residents. How do we center their voices and enable them to feel like they're a part of a conversation that's decisions are being made that directly impact their life and they're not even at the table, so it's a lot of just a really extraordinary experience of just seeing so many different elements of politics and public policy and power and interfacing. So that was kind of my beginning into this arena in the most substantive way. And then from there, one of my friends ran for office kind of on a lark, or at least that's how I viewed it. Because I was like, what are the odds of a progressive environmentalist winning in San Diego? Again, at that time, very conservative. And she asked me to join her campaign. And I was like, well, I mean, again, sort of understanding how we gain power. I knew we needed, it's not enough to just be on the outside, kind of trying to influence the inside. We needed champions on the inside. And so I was like, well, I think our odds are slim to none, but it's worth it. Let's start knocking on doors. I mean, we didn't know what we were doing. Honestly, we were just completely naive.
Can I ask for her name? Because
yes.
I was in San Diego like 2004.
Oh, yeah. Donna Fry.
Wow.
Wild. Yes, I'm sure you do know who she is. She had quite a journey in politics.
Donna Fry.
Yeah, Donna Fry.
Wow, that was crazy.
Yeah,
Didn't she like have
legendary.
her election stolen or?
Yeah, so that was kind of the beginning of that was kind of the peak. Well, that was obviously not a good experience, but that when we ran for mayor on a writing campaign, that was after about 4 years of when we had, really gone up against the power establishment and struggled to win change. But when she did win that first, this was 2000. When she did win, it was shocking to the whole system. She was not like anybody else. You definitely could visualize her, right? A beach, like her husband is a famous surfer. That frankly helped us win because, like I said, I don't think either of us thought she really had a decent shot. But her husband, Skip Fry, is so famous in the clean water surf community, and we had a beach community as part of our district, that it propelled her. And she's just a badass and, different than everybody else and just a truth teller and, no BS and just has conviction, just kind of a refreshing brand. So anyhow, she got to City Hall, she shook it up. And then we ran again. We're always doing crazy things. Like, I guess that's just kind of part of my journey, things that no one thinks we're going to do and that we don't really think can work. But we did run as a writing candidate for the mayor of San Diego against 2 white male Republicans. And it got so much attention. Yes, that people had to write in her name. I mean, it was like, people were like, I remember all the pundits going on TV and like, these people have no chance. Like, no one writes a name in. I mean, that just does. I mean, yes, of course, people write Santa Claus or, Brad Pitt or something silly, but not a legitimate writing candidate. Like that's, so we were, again, marginalized, but we were so used to that. Like, it didn't even faze us. There was no fear about it. There was no uncomfortableness because we needed.
I just want to pause you our listeners, because I think we're talking insider language, and for our listeners, this is San Diego in the early aughts. Mm-hmm. A woman wins the mayoralship through a write-in campaign.
Yes,
and San Diego at that time, as you said, was incredibly conservative. It was very much dominated by the military, by developers, and by this kind of what here in Hawaii we understand to be an economy built for visitors and not permanent residents.
Yes.
And this is also a community where you're organizing a very historically symbolic Latino community along the border where Cesar Chavez comes out of that community and the organizing of farm workers. And so I'm hearing that you have this friend that agrees to run for mayor. You're working on your campaign and you write in her name and like, just take that moment and she wins. I remember feeling like, holy shit, anything is possible. Anything. Yeah. It felt like a really powerful moment. And then we watched the machine start to suck all the momentum in. And
That's
so
right.
What happens?
Yeah. That's a great summary. She got, I think, 175,000 people to write in her name. And that's how she won. Yeah. Totally crazy. And so then the establishment marshaled their forces and, forced a recount. So I was the campaign manager. So I was there at the Registrar of Voters. And honestly, as I tell people, my strongest memory from that experience is shock. But really, when the first time I went to the Registrar of Voters, when the recount was starting, and literally just seeing physical ballots up piled high, they were all the people who had written her name, because the rest they could put in a machine, right? If you had punched the ballot, it just went in a machine, they recounted. But for hers, they had to do a manual recount, right, with the paper ballots. So I was just so floored, because it's like you hear 175,000, you can't tangibly, feel it. But then when I saw it, I was like, oh my God, we did that. That's so crazy. So, but despite the fact that the votes were legitimate and, we had won, there was a lawsuit filed, and so I should caveat to say she wasn't declared the winner immediately. What had happened was that, yes, this challenge happened, the vote count happened. And so there was some ballots at the end that were specifically challenged, and it became a court case. And what had happened was people would write in Donna Fry, but then they had not filled in the bubble. I mean, this is how silly and mechanical. We lost on a technicality. The law's been changed, but they wrote her name in, but didn't fill in the bubble. So literally the argument of the establishment was that people didn't actually vote for her. They were still considering all their options. And until they had put a little check mark in the bubble, it didn't count. So that's what we lost on, just a few votes where voters had, inadvertently not put a check in the ballot bubble with their pen. And that's how we lost. And so then, ironically, the guy who won resigned like a month later. I mean, you can't make this up. He resigns. And then we go up against another white male political establishment figure. And at that point, then the establishment had totally circled the wagons, and we're like, oh my God, okay, we need to stop this. And then we lost in that second round. So that was crushing. That was really, really crushing, because she was still a council member. So we still had to be there at council under this new white guy, conservative.
And I also just want to provide some context for the listeners, at least on my own story, Nicole, is that my first election, my baby little 18-year-old vote was cast in Bush v. Gore. I was a freshman at college in Poughkeepsie, New York. And, I come from a very white Christian conservative community, and the idea of representative democracy has always worked for me, because I represent the establishment. And then here we have, I don't know if you remember this election night for Bush v. Gore, but we didn't get the results for like weeks.
Same. Yes.
So then here I am 4 years later in San Diego, working in the progressive community. And this thing happens with Donna Fry. And it felt like the engines of democracy are broken. And how powerful to have that lesson early in your indoctrination, because we're having it all over again.
Yeah. It definitely.
So I just appreciate that. And I appreciate just the chutzpah that it takes to run a write-in mayoral campaign and like have everybody tell you, you're crazy.
Yes.
You're never going to win. This is stupid. Why are you doing this? And to watch the reverberations of that for years to come.
Yeah. I mean, thank you for that perspective. I think part of my survival tactics, like in this space, is just politics, is, letting go. Needless to say, you have to let go, but also like forgetting and just like, gotta go look ahead versus look past. So that's kind of fun to revisit that, my mind is going back and some of the scenes and experiences and feelings. And I will say it was a pretty dark time when we went back to council, and I didn't last very long, because we were cornered and we had no place to implement policies that meant anything. And so I was just like, I need to regroup, because this is, this was pretty much, we were, for a good 8 years, we knew like this guy was going to be mayor. And it was, again, we didn't have a progressive majority on council, didn't have a progressive mayor. It was like, okay, I feel trapped here and I don't know the way out. So I actually left City Hall and I left the country. So yeah, this is my like, I don't want to say eat, pray, love, because that seems too glib. It was more, it was more like I'm too cynical at this point. I'm feeling like I'm not approaching things with the same fresh eyes and like open heart, because it was so crushed. And so anyhow, I moved to Buenos Aires for a year, and then lived in Seattle for a year. And then after that, I came back and I was like totally back to normal and like ready to go. And so I did. And I went back to the same organization, Environmental Health Coalition, and fought another 5 years for environmental justice. And then, if you want me to continue the story of how then I got this.
Yeah, I just have one pause moment.
Sure,
because I think there is there's a short-sightedness that comes with youth.
Yes.
And long road that starts to emerge with age and experience. And, you know, that just because we're losing temper, or just because we're losing battles doesn't mean we're losing the war. And, you know, there's the oft spoken MLK quote, like, the arc of justice is long. I mean, the arc of history is long, but it bends towards justice. And for me, a lot of what this podcast is helping us to think about, I mean, we don't have like a list of the 9 key factors, how not to become jaded, cynical, is what do we do when we lose and we have to collect ourselves? So I'm actually really appreciating, we interviewed someone yesterday that talked about their burnout moment. Like, what do you do when you become really jaded and cynical because you had the chutzpah to fight and lose a battle that maybe changed everything for San Diego in the long term, but really just felt super painful. So I'm wondering, like, how did you collect yourself and restore yourself in Buenos Aires? And how did that sort of like global exposure resource you?
Yeah. I mean, I didn't really have a game plan. I was so burned out that I just needed to completely remove myself from California. And I kind of immersed myself. I mean, it seems kind of just stereotypical, but I, started doing yoga. I started exploring, spirituality. I mean, I was so desperate for something to cling to give me hope and to, again, kind of bring me back to the place of equilibrium, because I knew I wasn't there. I knew it. And, you have to be self-aware enough to like trust your gut about where you're at, because to be a warrior, like you need to be centered and able to like, to be kind of, people can blow you back and forth, but they can't, push you down all the way. That's how I kind of look at it. And when I'm not feeling that, I'm always cognizant that I need to either take vacation. And I mean, this was the extreme time of my life of needing to literally leave the country and just experience different culture, different, and just, again, not have to read the news. Like I needed a complete diet and just step away. That took months, by the way, for me to stop reading the news. And I mean, specifically San Diego news, months, because I was so in it. And I'm back in it, by the way. Like now I am also just as addicted to like the San Diego day-to-day political drama, because it is what the space we're in. And we have to know it. It's relevant to how we power map and how we, strategize and how we operate in the space, but it's exhausting and draining. And so, but yes, for me, I did need 2 years. And then, like I said, when I came back, people are like, you're like a different person. I was like, yeah, because I totally, just went on a media diet. And I knew, because it's so in my soul and my heart, that I was going to come back. I just let it play out as long as I needed to before I stepped back in. So I was broke. Let me tell you, it was rough. It was not good times. It was not fun times, but I was living, hand to mouth at that point. But at the same time, it was necessary and needed. And so, so like I said, I came back refreshed and got back in the game.
Do you, like, I oftentimes think about our pauses as not just immediately nourishing, but it like creates a little pot of gold inside of you, that the more we practice filling that pot of gold, the more we can resource it. Like, how do you drop into that time today to kind of resource you to go forward?
I'm very clear on when I'm being depleted of energy and motivation and hope. I mean, like, I can feel it. And I sense the jadedness creeping in. And then I immediately, like I said, I do mini vacations. I do weekends away. I'm very keen on my exercise and going, out for walks and, calling friends, trash TV. I'm the first to admit I am like crime number one, celebrity culture and trash TV. And it has nothing to do with me really caring. It has everything to do with a complete escape from the reality of, the lift, the boulder up a hill that we're experiencing. So I have many different tools, and I'm not even embarrassed about them because they serve a purpose, like you said, to just keep me centered and able to like do that and then come back and not feel like, again, just making sure I am keeping that optimism. And I'm capable of thinking creatively. That's another kind of lesson I've learned is I think, and I feel like Center for Food Safety actually excels at this just based on watching social media, is like how to still have a sense of humor about it all. I mean, and some joy and some, just like, I can't think of the perfect expression, but like the fruit, yes, somewhat futile, but at the same time, like we're in this together and we've got to be able to laugh at ourselves and laugh at the situation and yet still fight, obviously, still fighting, but balance, all these different emotions need to be in play.
For me, there's the societal reckoning with as egregious and fucking terrifying as this moment is, the thing that's going to propel us forward is joy.
Yeah.
So like, how do you continue to resource yourself with joy, with happiness, with laughter? I mean, it's funny. We have a battle over the CFS social media inside of the organization because there are people like, we're litigators, we're serious, we're doing the hard work. And I'm like, yeah, but that's not what motivates people.
Agreed.
It's joy, it's laughter.
Yeah.
It
can be both. Because I read your posts about your litigation and I'm interested in it. And I'm like, oh, they won. That's amazing and awesome. And I'm glad you guys are informing me. But yeah, I also love your humor and joy. And it's funny. I'm trying to get my team. I've said, oh, you guys got to check this organization out, and I would say my comms team is resisting because people aren't sure like how to thread that needle and, how to balance those emotions. But I think it's the human experience. And I agree. Like, another thing you were asking, how do I feel my well, I have certain artists that I love and I like am obsessed. Like I fly across the world just to see these people. Cause it's just like the joy, just you hit the nail on the head of I'm like, what do I feel? Number one, I feel it's like the one time when I'm at a concert when my brain turns off. Which is just like, I know it's like my brain is like, oh, thank you. Let us reconfigure, like, let us reset. Because while you're like screaming and yelling and dancing and, being silly, like we are recovering because of your intensity, And so I think for intense people, which is a lot of people in the movement, in the space, and you kind of need that intensity and passion. Yeah, we have to be intentional about the opposite. So I would say I'm a very intense person, but I think you would also find if you ask my sister or anybody, I have like maybe one of the best senses of humor because it's like they're one and the same. I don't know.
Really?
Like, so, yeah. So, I totally agree. I appreciate you saying that there is kind of like, people aren't sure how to navigate that within the organization. And I'm seeing that in my own organization. And I think, that's a movement issue. Are they still going to take it seriously?
Moment, yeah. I learned it crystallized for me actually during my years in San Diego when we were doing sort of anti-border activism. And as you know, the border is and was back then heavily militarized and cutting across families and history. I mean, the border makes no sense for the region if people understand how borderless the relationships are.
Yep.
And we kept having these protests, and I felt like the cops would come down on us so hard. So we showed up at a border protest as clowns and did this cross-border clowning event. And it rendered the entire situation absurd in broadly intelligible ways that like a serious protest would have just been seriously sort
Ignored.
of clamped down by the
Yeah.
crowd.
Oh, yes, yes.
And so I've continued to go back to that in my writing and in my research and in my own strategies. Like sometimes the face of power is so chilling that the only way to set it back on its heels is to laugh at it. And then in that moment, you see like a rupturing of the facade, you know, which is about fear. It is about hopelessness. That's what large corporations benefit from. I mean, the more scared you are of them, of the system, of climate change, of white supremacy, the less you'll feel resourced to be able to fight it.
Agreed.
And I do feel like that's what we get on our side, air quotes for those who are just listening, is we do get to resource joy and love. I mean, these are things that we're fighting for.
Yes. That's right.
So yeah, I really appreciate that moment. You know, you keep talking about your organization, so it's a great time to kind of pivot back. So we have you at the city council in San Diego, working to advance a progressive vision of the city.
And that's when
us to now.
Yeah. And by the way, so those years, 2004, 2005 is when climate first kind of came on the radar as a term. And in our backyard in San Diego, as you know, is Scripps Institute of Oceanography, which is one of the most foremost climate experts. And, you know, they're using the IPCC and they meet with the Pope, and, you know, they're very prestigious. And so we, you know, one of my last acts was bringing them to City Hall. I was like, you guys need to start getting political. Like, thanks for issuing reports, but like, it's not translating. So anyhow, that's when my experience with climate kind of really started. And then, yes, I was at, even I get like, what was this? It's been a zigzag. I've been inside and outside the system. And I think both places are valuable, by the way. And so I respect both. You need champions on the inside and the outside. It's like, it's a dance, and they both interplay off each other. But so I eventually ended up leaving EHC because I had a opportunity, a very rare opportunity, where we're having political drama, and our mayor, our first progressive mayor, had to resign in disgrace, and the council president, you know, just automatically became the mayor, and he needed environmental staff. And so all I cared about was, hey, I want to do this climate plan. I had been leading the citizen group for climate action, but the Republican mayors had always trashed our plan. And so finally I was like, well, if you'll let me do a new climate plan, you know, go bold and big and, you know, groundbreaking, give me staff, give me resources, you know, then yes, I'll take a leap of faith, because it was a 6-month gig. I didn't have, and he was going to go back to his old team and office, and he wouldn't have a job for me. So I was like, well, again, leap of faith, like, you know, just do the risky thing. I'm comfortable with risk. And just opportunity couldn't be passed up. So anyhow, so that's when I wrote kind of the city of San Diego's, at that time, was a very audacious climate action plan, and took a lot to get it through the bureaucracy, but eventually the person who was the mayor at that time backed it, and then a new Republican mayor came in, and it became, you know, we started over. But what I learned is that we didn't have enough support on the outside. So that's how I started my organization, is that I knew we needed a broad base, a diverse base of community and business stakeholders, small business, you know, community leaders, community-based organizations. We just needed more people to be clamoring about it, because the political will to actually implement this plan wasn't there. So anyhow, that's where I started Climate Action Campaign 7 years ago. And so it's just been kind of a rocket ship from there, in terms of action and disappointment, wins, disappointments, you know, navigating.
Can we go back to the juxtaposition of inside outside? Because I think for our listeners, like really understanding that frame when it comes to change making is really important. So can you talk a little bit more about what that looks like, not only in terms of your own journey, but maybe successful partnerships that have moved big things forward?
Yeah, for sure. I would argue that it's nearly impossible to make change without an inside champion, without somebody who you trust and who shares your values and has the same goal but they have access to the bureaucracy. They have access to the decision makers in a way that you don't, because you're still on the outside. And building those relationships.
You're talking about people that are elected officials, or they work inside of a business that you're trying to change, or.
Well, so yeah. Okay. Let me be more clear. That's a good question. So initially I was just talking about the people who either are the elected official or the staff for elected official. San Diego is a big city, 8th largest in the country. So city of San Diego has staff and they have a large bureaucracy. So this is not a, and the same thing applies to small cities, but you're just dealing at a smaller scale. But the city of San Diego is large. When you're a top 10 US city, you have resources and you have a lot of different, layers of bureaucracy to get through. So I believe, yes, you absolutely need at least one elected official who's going to be a champion, ideally a majority. I mean, it's kind of doing the power mapping, counting the votes. That's essential. But you need that, even I would say, as importantly, if not more importantly, is who's really doing the work, like actually writing the legislation, actually, working within the bureaucracy to get it approved through the multiple layers of people who can say no, getting it through a city attorney's office. There's just so many touch points for different places for pivotal policy to fail. And so you need to nurture and maintain those relationships. And the trust is gained over time. But yeah, I argue that of course you need decision makers because they're hitting the vote, yes or no, but you need their staff it can't just be any staff. It's got to be somebody who's like you. And so I always like when activists go on the inside working for an elected official, or even, like you said, even working for the bureaucracy at a city. That also has been hugely beneficial. And as far as business groups go, because they are a pivotal stakeholder, it's hard to pass policy if they're opposing it. You can, but you're right. If you can get them on your side, then you're unstoppable. I mean, frankly, especially, you can't always get the big businesses because there's so many reasons they don't even want to get political on controversial items. But small businesses are more nimble and they're more, they're just regular people, and they're, they like fighting the man too. And so, because they feel like that's what they do in their small business. So yeah, those are the kind of forging those kind of relationships and partnerships and allyships are essential. And I would say for my organization, building those diverse coalitions, and doing the power mapping to see that this is the right coalition to win, to get the, again, the ultimate vote count that you need, takes a huge chunk of my team's time. Really, maintaining those relationships, building them, growing them, expanding them is probably 75% of their time. Are those relationships.
Can I pause? Because there's something that I think about a lot. And now, I mean, for those who are just listening, both Nicole and I are white. And there is something I've noticed in my career when it comes to coalition building, is how whiteness and the historical memory of governments working for us that allows inside gaming strategies to make more sense than, for example, in San Diego, communities that have been functionally disenfranchised because they're quote unquote illegal or undocumented immigrants, many of whom have been living in the US, I will say, for generations.
And paying taxes.
And paying taxes. I mean, that was a huge moment for me living in San Diego and meeting my first undocumented immigrant and realizing his grandparents are who came to the US. And he's now third generation undocumented. Wow. And it was like, wow. Anywho, so when you're dealing with communities that will never go down to City Hall because it's a threat to their well-being, but their voices, their history, the truth of the system is an important part of the story you're trying to tell. Like, how do you navigate that when you're coalition building?
Yeah, I mean, for sure, that's an essential part of the coalition, our place-based frontline community organizations. I mean, I would say those place-based organizations in those frontline communities are obviously, they're the ones building the relationships with the residents and empowering them and training them, and elevating their voice. in San Diego, the politics have shifted so significantly. So you're right. When I was working at this organization based in National City, um, believe it or not, we did bring I mean, we even though it's conservative, we were able to organize residents and bring them to the city hall and the port district hearings, the air quality control district hearings, and they could speak for themselves. Like there was no. So how, I don't know, that's San Diego conservative, I guess. It's not the middle of the country where that was okay. And there was no really questions asked about whether they deserved to be there or something, whatever, some nonsense. We didn't really get that. So they definitely, but because they had that place and that voice because of this institution, this organization that existed in the community, right? There's no way they would have on their own known about the public hearing, known how to communicate and testify at a public hearing, known what the heck is power mapping. That was the central part of the organization's model, was doing, they called it, they trained promotoras who, not only spoke to other, community members, but also would become the voice, for their family and the community. And there was a lot of education and training before they started testifying and attending meetings with elected officials, and, being part of coalitions. So yeah, there is a history. I mean, this was in the 1990s I was doing that. So there is a history of that happening in community. In San Diego, the term of art that the community is like is communities of concern. So that's what we use. But so for communities of concern, they have had space. Now they haven't had power. So there's a difference. But you asked about how do we make sure their voices are not only integrated into a coalition, and not only are their points of view like elevated and probably, made to be the like they are leading on helping to develop the policy because they're the ones who are living it, and they know the answers, right? The communities who are experiencing the harm know the solution. So I think the good news is because we've had some institutional organizations, and not just the one I was working at, but there are others, that has been a practice that the progressive movement in San Diego has, I think, fairly, again, successfully off and on, because that's just politics and power. But I think that piece of it has been successful in terms of residents feeling like they have a voice and their voice is heard, not only in the coalition space, but in political spaces.
Did you do anything?
That's intentional.
Did you do anything inside the coalition to forge those relationships of trust? Because this is a moment in our movement, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where white environmental organizations are leading on policy-focused interventions to climate, food, and ag. Well, they're not leading in many ways, but how do we then sort of like build relationships of trust and allyship and collaboration that might leverage privilege and comfort working in predominantly white spaces, but aren't taking up the place of the folks who need to be there?
Yeah. And that's, essential. Absolutely. And I think, again, San Diego has a long practice of building these relationships. So these are not short-term transactional relationships. People need, people aren't just going to trust you. You have to earn it. And so you have to earn it over time. And I tell my team that all the time. You're not going to walk into a room and meet with some frontline community members and be trusted. That is ridiculous. I mean, I have, fortunately, because we're evolving as a movement, my team is diverse. So some of my team can walk in a room, be trusted because they're from the community. But when I walk in a room, it's literally just 25 years of being in the same political space. And so they're staff members of the organization, right? We've known each other for 10 plus years. That's kind of sensed. But it is absolutely, like I said, nurtured and prioritized. And when we're developing policy, the first thing we do, we have some organizations that we are super tight with. We have joint grants with. We re-grant to a lot of place-based organizations when we get a grant. not even because the foundation or the donor asked us to, but because that's the right thing to do. So make sure they have the resources to engage. At the same, we pay for participation in coalitions. We run a coalition, the Green New Deal Alliance, so we pay people to participate, be able to attend. But probably as importantly is making sure, like any kind of policy that we're developing, we reach out and say, let's have a conversation about this issue, this harm that we're seeing. Like, what are some ways we jointly can think about what the solution is? So we aren't just writing the policy and then asking for their support. We're at a table, messy as this process is, identifying and brainstorming, what are solutions. So sometimes that requires a facilitator, mostly just to because we all different. I mean, no one really knows the right answer. So we're all just fumbling around. People do research and bring ideas to the table, and then community members will weigh in about whether they think that's even feasible. Hey, that's not culturally fit. Doesn't fit. That's not going to work, or this will work better. And, so it's messy. It's length. It's long. But that is a practice. Again, I feel like, I'm not saying we've mastered it. It's a lifelong process, but there's a history of it. So we have some trust that's been built up. And so that's happening right now. Just a perfect example of how intersectional we intentionally are. We're working with a place-based organization of refugees who are prioritizing tenant protection, which we see as, essential. People need a place to live. This is a fundamental human right. So we're working with them on designing a tenant protection ordinance. Again, that is not our bailiwick. So we are just leveraging, to your point, our power within the political system and providing resources and joining them. No, we're joint partners on how do we pass, how do we keep people in their homes, that they deserve to be in. So we view that as an essential part of the climate movement. It's got to be intersectional, can't just be about reducing greenhouse gas emissions. It's about quality of life.
Something that's coming up for me as I think about this, another theme that we've been interrogating throughout this podcast is sort of like the intergenerational transfer of knowledge, intergenerational power sharing.
Yep.
And I would say that when chatting with my boss, and everybody who's been listening to the podcast knows that we have a really great 2 interviews with Andrew Kimbrell in season 1. There's been some pushback when I ask him, what does intergenerational power sharing look like? And what assets and strengths do millennials and Gen Z offer the movement? And how do we create space for those views and viewpoints? And then how do we as a movement younger folks learn to listen and defer to expertise and defer to it's a dance right now. And I think particularly in the context of the climate conversation, many folks my age and younger are pissed off at our elders that they allowed this fucking tragedy to go unchecked for so long. And obviously, that's not everyone. I mean, I think that's why Andrew kind of clapped back at me and was like, well, I haven't been on the sidelines. But I had this moment where I was like, there is deep anxiety around how do I show up in the right way at the right time. And specifically for white folks navigating the movement in a post Black Lives Matter context where attunement to one's own privilege matters. Need to be able to demonstrate that, not just in word, but in action and strategy. But when I heard you talking and I reflected on my own experience as a haole living in Hawaii, which haole is our term for white folks. And I remember when I first moved here, my PhD advisor was like, you're always going to be a haole, but you don't have to be a dumb fucking haole. And I thought to myself as I was listening to you, I'm like, that's kind of it. It's like, we can build deep relationships of allyship and trust with communities that have never been served by the system. Here in Hawaii, it's predominantly Native Hawaiians who don't even believe in the legitimacy of the state and understand Hawaii as an occupied place, asking them to get engaged on policy is a paradoxical request and can at times be a little tone deaf. On the issues that matter most to Native Hawaiians. And we all acknowledge that if we're not working on climate policy at the governmental level, I'll tell you who is. Giant corporations that would like to see no policies passed whatsoever. So it's like we have to participate and we can't show up like dumb fucking howlies. And what that takes, to round back to what you said, is time.
Yes.
It's just time in the fucking mud. Doing the dirty work of our organizing and relationship building.
And it's not always, and I might have painted like too pretty of a picture. It has ebbs and flows and it has ups and downs. And there's some organizations who don't trust us, and I'm okay with that. Do you know what, like, meaning that's their right. And we have to earn it. Like if something we've done is they don't agree with, or they think like we didn't do it right, then we have to we still stay in, we're still coming to the table, meaning not to take over the table, but saying like, that's total, we respect that, but like we still want to be here because we need all of us to win the big wins, and no one really challenges that. Like, I think to your point, like we need a racial, multi-generational coalition to be powerful, deep-pocketed fossil fuel corporations who will stop at nothing and, thrive on when we have weak links, right? This is whenever there's infighting on the left, the circular firing squad, as we call it, is when they clink their champagne glasses. So I think there's kind of that overarching acknowledgement and understanding. So it's like, let's keep working at it. Like, let's not give up.
Well, so that's what Vandana Shiva said. She's like, you Americans, you young people, you're obsessed with your differences. And you're losing sight of what you have in common and what we're working towards. And that would be glib if a white person said that. But as a woman of color working in these movements for decades, I kind of honor the wisdom in that too. It doesn't mean, oh, let's just focus on where we're going and not on the how. We need to create the change in the micro that we're seeking in the macro.
But and let me just say, because I think to your point, and again, my age, so I'm 53. So I still have some years that I have to work. So in terms of intergenerational, honestly, I say this all the time. The favorite part of my job, the hardest part of my job, but also the part I view most important, is that I am training the next generation to take over. And I think my team would agree. I prefer them to be the face of the organization. And what they don't know is that it's really because I need them to build their stamina and skills. And I need them to get hit, to understand, like, there are people going to be gunning for you, lobbyists and stakeholders, and they have their job, you have yours, but like I need you to be able to learn how to keep your sense of self and like your power. So it's all part of the training. Because sometimes they don't want to be the face, and I'm like, no, but see, not only are you the right messenger, more importantly, you don't know, in 10 years, this is going to serve you, because then when you take over CAC, I'm definitely not going to be one of these people who holds on to, even though I'm the founder, it's a classic, right? Founders like syndrome. I feel I'm counting down the days till I can pass the torch. And it also, it circles back toward like self-care, because I also feel like this work is exhausting and it does eat away your central nervous system. And it's like, for my own preservation, I there will be, I don't want to say exactly how many years, but the clock is already going down for me. And again, it's not that I don't think I have value. It's just like, I am happy to let the next generation take over, but yeah, so I view, we invest in coaching and in personal training, and like, what do they want to, how are they going to develop what's their personal development plan? Because even if they don't stay some people are like, oh my God, the politics is too much, I can't take it. I'm like, that's fine, just stay in the movement, please. Like, so they're like, I just want to grow food on a farm. And I'm like, fine, that's still part of the movement. But like, no matter where my team goes, like, I feel like, usually the feedback I get is, oh, I'm so much better trained than my new peers. And so I'm like, oh, thank you.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I will say that's something that Andrew's done a really great job of at CFS. And I try to do that, is like, this can't just be about what I want to do. It can't just be the Ashley show, even though I might be the most articulate on these issues in this moment. We need a broader set of voices. And, I also don't know how many more white people, even white women, we need being the articulators of sort of complex issues that we're working within.
And that's the discomfort for my team. You can imagine, right? They're new to the space and they're suddenly having to like go lobbying or testify on very nuanced, technical policy issues. And I'm like, yeah, it's going to be you, not me, because I've done it. It's time. So they're like, what? I'm not ready. And I'm like, you are. And even if they're not, that's how I was trained. Honestly, I was thrown into the deep end and I didn't feel ready. And, I was scared and nervous, but that's where the growth happens. And so I love watching that growth. They don't know it. I'm just, it's like the wisdom that I have over these many years. But yeah, that is, if I leave no other legacy, that's like the legacy I want to leave, is like, there's a new crop of very diverse young people who are ready, because this battle is only, you know what I mean? It'll never end. The fossil fuel corporations, they have money till the end of time. So we're gaining momentum, but I think CFS knows more than anybody. Like, they have plan B, C, and D ready.
Yeah.
They're ready for the political winds to shift. And yet they know how to navigate those political winds still to delay action and undermine us. And, like just stop progress. And so my team is seeing that, it's interesting to watch them just see politics unfold, even though they're like, we have all progressive council, we have progressive mayor. And yet the cap is sitting there, I'm like, yep, because they still all need, our political system is based on money and who gives money, I don't have to tell anybody who's listening to that reality. But in any case, I totally agree. And I'm happy to, and when I feel like we're ready, I will step back. So I agree. We don't need my voice, but my role now is like, how can I just keep lifting up young people of color, especially to be the leaders of the movement. That's how we're going to win, I think, ultimately.
So I don't want this entire interview to go without having a little bit of a conversation around climate.
Okay.
And
that's true.
Although, again, this is the point. We know you're a leader, climate action in San Diego, and really working in the machinations of government to move climate plans forward. So for those who are wondering, what are we talking about here? Like, that's the legacy of work. And I'll do a little, intro to kind of help people give context, but there is nothing more fucking terrifying than the climate emergency.
Yep.
And here in Hawaii, we're watching homes fall into the ocean. Yesterday, an entire beachfront walkway on the south shore of Maui, west side of Maui, just fell into the ocean.
Wow.
So sea level rise is here.
Yep.
We know that the climate emergency is disproportionately impacting low-income communities. It's ravaging subsistence-based communities that rely on the earth and the weather for their food and well-being.
Yep.
We all do, but some of us are just further from that. How are you winning? And what's the challenges you face?
Yeah. We win again, I believe, by creating these powerful coalitions of diverse stakeholders. Always, like, to your point, centering the equity component of policy, like what's needed, being persistent, showing up. I always say, like, really, politics is about who shows up. And what to your, to our earlier conversation, we have to make sure the right people are showing up, and the right community members who are, again, experiencing the most harm have to be the ones that we facilitate showing up, so their voices are heard. So that through line for me is just never giving up and persistence and just showing up, like, is I have found in addition to these coalitions, kind of the magic formula. Because ultimately, there is the same group of people. If you're, you're a national organization, so it's different. But when you're a community-based organization in a space, it's the same people. Everyone moves around to different, organizations or corporations or, but the lobbyists are the same. The electeds are the same because they just move from one office to another, as you know, like they do not go away. So that again, you become as an organization sort of a trusted voice, and you have to earn that obviously over time. But like, I just think persistence is so important. And the challenge is, so we win, I think through our coalition building. The challenges are that, we have a large multinational fossil fuel corporation called Sempra, building most of the LNG plants in Houston and New Orleans. And they operate two big utilities in California, electric and gas. So they have huge power, unlimited resources, and they're just messing with the public because they present a green face and a commitment to net zero, and how they just play the game, but they effectively delay and stop a lot of progress. And it's through money, it's through soft lobbying, they just have their ways of misinformation that they spread, especially to decision makers or the bureaucracy in different cities. So that is, and I'd say the other challenge is like keeping people in the space. Politics is not for the faint of heart. It's heartbreaking. It's soul crushing. You cannot escape that. I tell my team that directly. You will have your heart broken in this job. I guarantee it. The progressive electeds will let you down. We see this all the time. So like, steel yourself, because they have their own political calculations going on. And so they're not going to do the bold and the right thing. And then, but how are you going to respond to that versus react to it, and how are you going to, again, self-preservation within that. So I would say that's a challenge, like keeping people being willing to not check out and to just sort of give up. I think that's a huge challenge. And I don't think I have the magic answer, but I do think there's enough wins to where hopefully, people will stay in this space and they see the power that they're building, for the community voices, I think. But yeah, there's a lot of dynamics happening for sure. The other challenge I will say, just to point it out, because we're in the nonprofit world, is that it's hard to constantly be on a treadmill of fundraising, because that's, how much amount of time, that energy that takes away from us being in the fight the fossil fuel corporations don't have to expend. We're expending a ton of energy because I have to bring in my team. They're part of the fundraising machine on that piece of the puzzle. I think that's another huge challenge for nonprofits,
Yeah, I know all too well. I really appreciate your time today, Nicole.
Oh, I've loved being here.
Feel like your soul sister.
Good.
And I'm just wondering if you can give our listeners one last story of hope, or a win.
Yeah.
That demonstrates the value of tenacity over time.
Great. I would say, as an organization, our biggest win has been when we took down Sempra. I was just highlighting Sempra as this big evil fossil fuel corporation. When we basically broke away from our monopoly utility, San Diego Gas and Electric, and there's a program in California called Community Choice that allows communities to take back control just of electricity, not of gas. So it's not the whole kit and caboodle, but it is a big piece of the puzzle of trying to put clean electrons onto the grid that powers our lives. And so when we announced, it was part of this climate action plan that I developed in the mayor's office, and then climate action campaign, we took it from there to build the community will and the political will. And as soon as we launched, Sempra formed their own front a front group to fight us, and they invested millions of dollars to basically not only crush the organization, and they attacked me personally to try to, get to sort of squash my ability to have a voice. And obviously they amassed, their own coalition of stakeholders to fight us and tell the political elected officials not to support this pretty major shift in power. So it was a 5-year battle. I mean, I went through different staff members. I mean, it was rough. It was challenging. Again, even my team was personally attacked in different spaces because we had to do a lot of community outreach and education. So we were everywhere. So SEMPRA was also everywhere. So they just played dirty. But at the end of the day, over time, we got the votes. Like, we didn't have it obviously, if we had a year one, I would have called the vote. I'm a vote counter. At the end of the day, when you're in politics, all I do is count votes. So you don't want to call the question until you have the votes. Like, I'm never going to call the vote. I'm never going to call for a vote if we don't know exactly what the outcome is going to be. I cannot, that's not how you play this game. So it took us 5 years. We finally got the votes. We built and brought enough coalition, and we persuaded the elected officials to take a risk, to go big, take on this big, powerful corporation. They're like the landmark corporate. They have a massive tower downtown with SEMPRA on the building. They hover. It's like a Batman scene. So when we finally had the votes, it was pretty, no one and everyone, the political establishment lobbyists are like, I just don't think you're going to win this, Nicole. It's too much. You're asking too much, and you're trying to break up a monopoly. Like, that's just doesn't happen. So it did take us 5 years, but we did it. And I think that really shifted the landscape of what the progressive movement thought was possible. And so it's, I think, a big legacy for our organization. And that new entity called San Diego Community Power is thriving. They now have hundreds of millions of dollars to reinvest back into the community versus those profits going into shareholder pockets. So, and they're still, SEMPRA is still fighting that San Diego Community Power. Like they, in other words, they never give up, but at the same time, they're winning as an entity, as this new nonprofit public power entity. And so that's my story, that I think, we never gave up, and we just fought the establishment, and we won. And it's succeeding. As it's now, they're about 3 or 4 years old, and all this new money is going to come to help us get EVs, rooftop solar, batteries, new money on top of the federal money coming in. And, it's just like good stuff. So I think like we try to remind people we did that, we can do it again. And, on a grand, we can scale and replicate those kind of wins.
Yes. Yes. To more of that.
Yes. More of that.
Well, thanks so much.
Yeah. Thank you. Today. Thanks for doing this Hero's Journey podcast. It was an honor to be.
I know it feels so important to be able to remind young folks and old folks, we win.
That's right.
It's just a lot of loss on the way.
Yes. It's still that's going to be part of the story, but that's the hero's journey.
The Hero's Journey is brought to you by the Center for Food Safety. Production by Julia Ranney and Ashley Lukens. Editing and social media by Amanda Lillibridge, Duray Shin, and Annalisa Camacho. Theme song by Walker Lukens and Adam Mason, and audio engineering by Adam Mason. You can find us across all podcast platforms and follow us at Center for Food Safety on Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook, and CFS True Food on Twitter. We're on the web at theheroesjourneypodcast.com. Do you have a hero you'd like to see on the podcast? Fill out the form in the show notes or email us at theheroesjourneypod@gmail.com. If you enjoyed this podcast, like and subscribe, and make sure you'll never miss an episode. We'll see you in a few weeks.